Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Data Playbook. We're getting into week 10 here, and we're going to kick it off with Thursday Night Football with Vegas visiting Denver. And so then getting into the team data as usual, we have the Broncos favored on the money line with a spread of 9.5 and a total line of 42.5. That does make sense with that spread given that the Raiders are 2-6 and the Broncos are 7-2. And I'm just going to switch over to the averages first here before going through some of the ranking information. If we look at the Raiders, they have a pretty below average rank across the board offensively, maybe a little closer to average defensively, but they do really like their tight ends, and they are much better at stopping tight ends than general receivers. For the Broncos, you have about average here for scoring, a little below average for passing, above average for rushing. Defense is top third across the board, and other than that, they just struggle with their tight ends on Denver. Getting into the quarterbacks for this game, you have Geno Smith and Bo Nix. Geno Smith averages 12.5 fantasy points per game this season, while Bo Nix is just under 20. Geno Smith has also had 11 passing interceptions this season, with no other turnovers. Bo Nix has had 6 interceptions this season, and 1 fumble lost due to a sack. I'll change these numbers over so you can look at those in detail. And then just to see how much they rush for their teams, you have Geno Smith averaging about 3 carries a little over per game, giving him about 15.2% of the team's total carry share. And Bo Nix just under about 5 carries a game, giving him 18.8% of the team's carry share. Next up with the running backs, you have Ashton Jeanty and J.K. Dobbins. Jeanty averages 14.5 fantasy points per game, and J.K. Dobbins averages 11.8. The only turnovers between the two comes from Jeanty with 1 rushing fumble. And then here's how your averages stack up, as well as your weekly breakdowns if you're interested in that. And looking again at the carry share, you have Jeanty getting the largest share at 70%. For J.K. Dobbins, he has a carry share of 60.5% of the team's total carries. Once again, there's not much share between anybody else here on Denver, really with just Bo Nix, Harvey getting 20.6%, and then J.K. Dobbins with the rest. Getting into our number 1 receivers, you have Trey Tucker and Courtland Sutton. Tucker has averaged 12.7 fantasy points per game this season, and Courtland Sutton has averaged 13.4. With no turnovers, we'll just flip over the averages, and then look at their share, where you have Trey Tucker averaging 24%, which does seem to be the largest of any receiving share with anybody else on the team. It is interesting to note that your other large ones, I think we'll see that this is Brock Bauer, but this one I think is also Jacoby Myers, who is no longer with the Raiders. So it is interesting that that hangs out here, even though he's no longer part of the team. I'll have to see if that I can change that or how I want to deal with that in the future. And over here with Courtland Sutton, you have him at 28.6% of the team's total receiving share. Over here, I think that's Troy Franklin, who I think we'll look at next. But he does have the largest share of his team, which is expected from a number 1 receiver. And then getting into the number 2 receivers, you have Tyler Lockett and Troy Franklin, with Lockett averaging just 2 points per game this season, and Troy Franklin averaging 11.6. The only turnover does come from Troy Franklin on a receiving fumble. And then the averages and their breakdowns, as well as their share. Over here, you have Tyler Lockett, who just came to Vegas. So looking at their breakdown of receiving share, you have Tyler Lockett with this small slice. I believe that's because he just got traded and only had 1 game with the Raiders so far. So it's pretty small to begin with. I think that he'll probably end up seeing more pretty soon here, but that's probably like 2 to 3%. But yeah, expect that to grow. With Troy Franklin, as I mentioned before, he has 19.5% of the team's receiving share, and that is the second largest of anybody, which again is kind of expected for a number 2 receiver, unless the tight ends are heavily utilized. And that makes a good transition to get into the tight ends with Brock Bowers and Evan Ingram. Brock Bowers has averaged 17.4 fantasy points per game, while Evan Ingram has averaged only 6.7. With no turnovers between either of them, we'll just go to the averages and their weekly breakdowns. And then with their receiving share, you have Brock Bowers with 19.8% of the team's total receiving share. And over here with Evan Ingram, it's a little smaller, unfortunately got cut off, but I think that's about 10 to 12%. In fact, just going back to Sutton so that we can see that number, it's 10.9%. So Evan Ingram gets about 10.9% of the team's receiving share. So I think for this game, assuming that the Broncos will win, is probably a safe bet. I think it may come down to if Denver can really get started sooner than they have in the past. And it may be really important to look at this tight end information, given that Denver does not use their tight ends very much. And so I assume that Evan Ingram will get very little with a defense that's very good against tight ends. And then also with the Raiders being very good with tight ends and having Brock Bowers against a team that's about average, maybe a little below average for stopping tight ends. So if the Raiders have a chance, I think that they utilize their tight ends a whole bunch. Otherwise, I think the Broncos probably still have this one with their pretty good defense and their offense that's working out the kinks. So that's the pregame review of Week 10 Thursday Night Football with the Vegas at Denver. I hope that it was useful and that there was something that you got out of it. And if so, leave a like and subscribe. And leave a comment on what else you might want to see in the future. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.